Hi folks, thanks for tuning in. Ton's Gauntlet with you again on Rhythm's Riddle, also on BitChute, once on YouTube, being phased out. Well, I've been phased out with the shadow ban for the past 3 years. And so what I'm going to mention here today, it's about literature, specifically contemporary novels, novel writing, and the abandonment of art within modern novels. And there's been a wholesale liquidation of any artistic literary value across the board, basically, in most writing, in pulp and pulp writing. And specifically, I'm going to take up Stephen King because he represents that decadence of the total disregard for the history of literature and the disregard for art. And I'll just point out, I think Stephen King is almost as bad, but not as bad as his predecessor. Oh man, names slipped my mind all of a sudden, because he writes those short stories about the sort of the paranormal and the occult, and he was 100 years ago, maybe less, but kind of those old classic works that people like. Well, then what does it matter? I forgot the name. I think you know who I'm talking about. That American kind of, it's sort of a paranormal sci-fi guy from, he did a whole bunch of works like Call of Cthulhu, I think he did, right? Probably absolutely the worst writer in history. Sorry to so boldly admit. I know most people just, they cannot stand in this world someone thinking anything about literature. It's the last thing they want to think about, or have someone else think about as well. It's the last thing they want to have someone else think about too, most of the time. Oh, literature. Oh, yeah. Oh, that little thing over there. Sorry, folks. Literature is at the center of our lives. Drama is the center of our lives, and literature, and we are born right into the history of literature. And Stephen King has done more to ruin literature and art within the United States, well, it's within the world, within the English-speaking world, and you can be certain that he's been translated into like a bajillion other languages to, Stephen King and Swahili, it's like, oh yeah, he's whacking off hard. He's really like cashing in on his, the momentum of his thrust, right? That's what it is. It's the momentum of his thrust. But really, what's behind it? Now, I mean, I haven't read one in a long time because he sucks. He sucks so bad that, you just need to read 2 or 3, just like that other guy who wrote the Cthulhu thing, whose name I forgot because he's so nominal, but other people like. Other people, like I've heard other people say that, oh yeah, my favorite writer. And you look into these things, and the literary technique that they're utilizing is so obtuse and so scathingly artless. It's like unabashedly shallow. That's the thing. It's like reading this kind of thing. It leads to a whole culture in California and America. It's like people, and even in Europe, all over the world, India, Australia, Brazil, all over the world, people are unabashedly shallow. We're giving into a culture of absolute unabashed shallowness. And where they have no idea how completely cheap their literary techniques are of talking about vapors seeping in, like vapors in a room that became some conduit for extraterrestrial lights, essentially. Like that's the summation of all the plots and all of the things and all of the Stephen King and all of the things. It's just the most cheap and artless resort to the use of language. And I could catch on to that. I read Stephen King when I was young. And of course I guess he's like that. He tries to hook into people when they're young and then hopes that a certain percentage of those people won't be able to dig their way out of those sort of psychological underworlds that he lures them into through cheap technique and a very exploitative use of language. You know, Marcel Proust was not exploiting the use of language. Marcel Proust was a blossoming of language to become one of the greatest writers who's ever lived, and then they can shine forth even in translation. Same goes with Dostoevsky and Goethe and Hermann Hesse and Nabokov. Salvador Dali was like this. Salvador Dali wrote one novel. It's not a psychedelic novel or a surrealist novel in the way that you would think it might be. It's a classic historical romance. That's what it is. It's a grand classical romance in the style of Marcel Proust, yet much shorter. Dali's novel was actually a little bit too short because he was such a brilliant writer, and the fact that he just wrote one novel for all of us and then he left it at that, it's like, well, that just attests to his genius. All he had to do was write one novel. Dali was such a genius. He didn't have to fickle around all his life with short stories and then trying to create bigger works, which I'm sure all of the other artists that I mentioned do that. Did do that. They were lifelong writers, whereas Dali was a polymath. But what he did in his novel is just, it surpasses all other novels. It's like one of the one of the absolute very best novels of the 20th century. And you can narrow that down. Dali's novel is a work of genius, just as Swan's Way and Remembrances of Things Past, especially Remembrances of Things Past. And then, of course, the brothers Karamazov and some of the other books. You know, I didn't actually think Tolstoy was quite as great as Dostoevsky. It's like you read them and Dostoevsky seems to be in a whole nother category. And Tolstoy is sort of on the level of Pasternak. They had similar sort of historical novels that they wrote. They were similar and grand, but it could be the translation as well. That makes a big difference. But it seems to me that the translations of these other writers, Dostoevsky and Marcel Proust, are the absolute best. And there are great modern novelists too, but I think the best writing now, it's nonfiction in the 20th century and everything. You know, Dali, who's going to outdo Dali? Who's really going to do that? I mean, it can be done. I mean, because it's about voices and perspective. And of course, that's the thing. It's not like who's going to outdo Paco de Lucia on guitar. It's like, well, yeah, essentially no one's going to outdo Paco de Lucia. And yet that doesn't mean that we can't each achieve our own excellence in our own way. And in some way, people like Tomatito have gone so far beyond Paco de Lucia in their own way. They've blossomed like Paco blossomed, but in their unique way, with respect for Paco. We blossom simultaneously. So in a way, literature is like that too. There's plenty of room for writers and for people to keep writing, and it's an important endeavor to do. And it's good that there are many people trying to do it. And it's a shame that some of the very worst of them are the most successful and raking in most of the money at the airports all over the world, and with the popular buying of them. So to go back full course to Stephen King, one of the most terrible, artless writers of all time, you can tell. The first couple novels I read when I was young, one of them was sort of seductive, but I was young. I had, when you're young, you really haven't had time to develop your taste. So you read something and you just sort of have an open mind toward it. You don't know what to think about it. And if it reads with a story, you kind of accept it, and sometimes take the punishment of artlessness as a kind of foray into an ulterior mode of production or something, Like that's what he's offering these books as. Oh, look how many he has. It's just everyone's a foray into some ulterior mode of production that basically has all of them basically have the fundamental structure is essentially the same. Like I said, there's some vapor in the room or in the world, and it has some sort of conduit to a portal to some other side of the universe, some extraterrestrial or metaphysical key of divination, and then he wraps some cheap story around it with suspense. They're all the same, and but when we go to them, we can get stuck in this kind of thing, I was like, well, that's fine. He gets like 10% of his readers are never going to be able to climb out of those pits, and they'll be thinking that he's all right, he's actually pretty good. He's a great writer, one of the best. Absolutely, they'll say. Stephen King, one of the best writers, fiction writers of all time. Well, if you're just determining best by statistics, like the computer and the internet and all of the World Wide Web is doing, it's like trying to rewrite humanity in terms of statistics, so nobody can think for themselves anymore. And statistics think for us. The statistics tell us what to think. That's what's happening. And people don't see it. And they're going along with it everywhere, even the free speech platform. It's like nobody talks, nobody's thinking. Nobody's thinking. And there's no support either. At the very least, there should be support, and yet it's like not even there, like no enthusiasm, right? No one's like issuing revelations of enthusiasm. It's such a paradox that people would get involved with the internet and then find themselves so alienated from the true fundamental spirit of our human heart and our human physiology, which is to support one another and show cheer and gratitude and delight whenever and wherever it's due, and not to hold back, and not to become pill bugs wrapped in upon ourselves, unable to communicate to the outside world, except maybe through like vibrations, Morse code. Right? Beep, 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 beep. It's like, that's my way of saying F you, right? Whatever. People have, it's like, it's no way to communicate. It's no way to be a human. That's no way. And creating those kinds of art, it's like we've got to liberate ourselves into higher forms of art. We have to go into classics. That's the thing. Whatever we're studying, guitar, music, or literature, or art, we have to look back into the classics and realize why the great men of former times, the great artists before us, were and have already been by far, far better than us in many ways, and especially in terms of art. And that when we don't even recognize that, and that what we owe, that we owe to basically not write very much, right? He's a very crapulent writer, meaning he'll just fill pages after pages, tomes after tomes of just the most artless and sidetracked nonsense. And so that's what the sad thing is at the end of the day. There's really no intuition into the workings of the human heart and the workings of ethics within a human heart, and the paradoxes of philosophy that you find in Dostoevsky, and the subtleties of psychology and ethics, which you find in Marcel Proust, and the subtleties and art and inspiration that you find in Hermann Hesse and Salvador Dali and great writers. And then, so you can determine success on statistics. Way to go. You think you've made it because you won the lottery. But us artists know that in spite of it all, we have to go on and do and explore and try to achieve great things, which is really hard to do. It's always the harder task, no doubt. I'm not saying King is doing something easy. Literature is a very difficult thing to do, and he tokened in. He's a cop-out, basically, in terms of art, a complete cop-out. I mean, because really, why is Dali's novel just a little bit too short? Because of art, in fact. He was so artful to limit it in that way. And he knew what he was doing. He was speaking to an audience of television watchers, mostly. So he knew that. He understood that. And Dali's novel is one of the best. And I wish I could remember that name of that other novel. It's not a novel. He wrote short stories mainly, but they're essentially the precursor, I guess, to Stephen King. It's probably what Stephen King grew up on, and that's why Stephen King is just so far gone into, I guess it's a kind of a literary egotism. He's just so far gone upon himself. There's, he's unabashedly shallow. Like I was saying, he has no clue how shallow he is and how artless he is. He thinks he's an artist, right? But he has no clue that he's betrayed the true muse, and he has betrayed the spirit of creative inspiration that pervades the cosmos.